Kids do this because it's very important.
Okay.
Can you please spell your name?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Amy is my first name. Thuesen.
Thank you very
It's
much.
commonly misspelled, so I'm glad you
Right.
asked.
And mine has been misspelled on bylines, which is why it drives me crazy.
Yep.
So my first real question for you, Ms. Susan, is how long have you been traveling?
I probably started really concentrating on travel as a hobby about 8 to 10 years ago. I had the opportunity to be a chaperone for a school trip to Spain with Spanish classes. I did not take Spanish. I do not know Spanish, but I had the opportunity to do that, and that really started the travel bug for me. We had a really good time. It was like a 10 or 12 day trip all through a certain part of Spain, and it was just what have I been doing my whole life? And I've always been kind of a traveler, but I've really kind of kept it to maybe the U.S. as much as I can, probably for money too. And so once I became older and had a little bit more spending money, I chose to spend it on travel, and I really, really love it.
Very cool. Where have you traveled?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so outside of this country, I've been to Canada. I grew up near Canada, but I don't count that. It's kind of like home. I have been mostly to Europe, but a little bit of Africa. This past summer, I was in Russia, which was kind of a big deal because that takes a lot to get your visa. And of course, with our relationship with Russia right now, it was kind of tentative, but that was really fun. Probably one of my most exciting places was I did go to Morocco, which was really, really fun. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. And I've been to lots of European countries. Probably the UK was my favorite. Been to Ireland, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, France. So quite a few countries. This summer we're going to Germany and the Czech Republic, or Czechia as they're now called. So yeah, it's been pretty fun.
Awesome. I'm German and Czech.
Yeah?
So yeah. So
I'm going to your homeland.
that's very interesting. What is the first trip you ever took? You already answered that question, so I'm going to skip that one. Why do you travel? Why do you travel?
Well, I think when I took that first trip to Spain, the thing that impacted me most was seeing how other people live. I think, and not that Spain is hugely different from here, but they just have different customs and different ways of living. Like, for example, one thing that really struck me was here in the U.S. when you go out to eat, it's usually pretty fast, and you're kind of in, you're out, 45 minutes to an hour max. And when we went to Spain, I didn't really know what to expect. And I mean, we were at one meal for 3 hours, and the waitresses were just they weren't kind of at your table all the time like they are here. And I was like, oh, this is so weird. But it was really a neat and relaxing experience. And it was really we got a chance to sit down and actually talk to people. And so I think I started learning things about other ways of life that really interested me. And it just kind of was a little bit of a mind-blowing experience, because as a person who kind of lives in landlocked Minnesota, if you don't get out of that bubble, I hadn't really been a lot out of the Midwest, aside from some other trips I'd taken, to Washington, D.C. and stuff. I think once I got out of that bubble, I was I didn't really understand how different people were, yet the same. You go and you hear about people in Europe, and you're they're so separate from me, and they're so different from me. And it makes you kind of feel like us versus them, in a sense. But then when you go somewhere, when I went to Morocco, for example, that seems like it would be a country where things are very different from here, which they are. But then in essence, they're really not that different, because you get a chance to talk to people. You learn a little bit of the language, enough to just kind of communicate pleasantries and politeness. But then you realize they're really not living a hugely different life. One of my most impactful experiences was this past summer. I play Pokemon Go. I'm a nerd. And we were in Tallinn, Estonia. And my friend and I were looking for a Pokemon raid. And we saw that one was happening in this one little square. And we got there, and we saw a bunch of other people gathering, and we're I wonder if they're here for that. And we could see their phones, and yes, they were. So we ended up having this. They couldn't speak English. We couldn't speak Estonian. We ended up having this 10 to 15 minute gathering and communication. It was just really fun.
That's awesome.
around Pokemon. It's super kind of weird, but it was actually really fun, and I never would have gotten that experience without traveling, and I wouldn't have gotten to know people and how same yet different they can be. That's part of the fun of traveling for me.
Random question. Do you think I should stop and do another video, or does it matter for the
It
file
doesn't really
size?
matter because
Okay.
you can split it like as you want to.
Perfect. So that's awesome. The next question that I have is, so that was a memorable experience that you had when you were traveling. Can you think of anything else that was a really memorable experience that you had while you were traveling, and why does that stand out to you? It's kind of putting you on the spot, I know, but
No, there have been a lot of memorable experiences. I think some of the most memorable experiences have come out of getting lost, which is really scary because you're in this different country. A lot of times you do not speak the language very well. Usually I try to, before I go to a country, learn like numbers and greetings and politenesses, like thank yous and what their like customary stuff is in their language, but I don't have a huge capacity for language, unfortunately, outside of English. And but I try. And getting lost is really scary, but it also allows you to be vulnerable. And so some of those experiences have been my best because like one time we were in Ireland, and granted in Ireland they speak English, so it's a lot better. But we were kind of in this middle like alleyway area, and all of a sudden there were like cameras and a platform being set up, and we were like, oh, should we not be here? And they're like, oh, the president's going to be giving a speech here. And I was like, I'm sorry, who? The president. I said, of Ireland? Yeah. Okay. Should we stay? Should we go? And it was just the most odd, weird, getting lost experience I've ever had. But it was like, oh, there's the president of Ireland. And we watched him give his speech. Like, it was the weirdest thing ever, but it was so funky.
that is cool.
It's
That's
super
really
random.
cool.
Yeah.
So what, kind of on the same lines, but maybe veering off a little bit. So you talked about getting lost.
Right.
Have you ever had other negative experiences while traveling, or can you think of one specific negative experience? If so, what was it, and how did you deal with it?
I would say that by and large, very rarely do we have negative experiences, aside from like one time I got there and I was like, oh, I booked the hotel for the wrong nights. And that worked out fine, but it was panic inducing because like I'm in a new country. I just was like on a plane for 10 hours and I'm exhausted and I don't have a place to stay. It was scary. But I would say probably the most negative experience was in Athens, Greece. And I talked to some of your students about this already too. I totally got like yelled at by one of the like curators. I think they're a curator or tour person, park people at the Acropolis, the place where it's the top, like one of the top hills in Greece, and that's where they built all the temples to their gods and goddesses. It's in ruins now. It's like a major tourist attraction. And I was there and I had touched a piece of like the hill, and it didn't look to me like I would never touch a building, right? Because they're all roped off. But we had just walked down a hill and there was like a area in the hill and I touched it. And this park person, like ranger, came out of nowhere and just started yelling at me. Why you do that? Why you do that? And I felt mortified because I was like, I wasn't intending to do anything wrong. And she was very upset with me. And I felt this horrible feeling in my gut, like I have completely ruined the impression of all tourists for this lady because I didn't even know I was doing something wrong. And I just was like, for a day or two, I was like, what did I do wrong? I don't even know what I did wrong. But I felt like that guilt from being yelled at, and she really lit into me. So that was probably one of the most negative, like, ooh, that made me not feel good about life experiences.
Oh my God.
But overall, people have been super duper polite, like so gracious. Anybody who says that people in Europe hate Americans is completely wrong. That people in other countries hate Americans, I mean, they certainly have questions about some of the things that we do, but they've always been like very, very gracious hosts. So that's been nice.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. What are, Can you name like one? I know you've talked a lot about this
Mm-hmm.
already, but what is one lesson that you feel like you've learned through traveling?
Two. One's really practical and one's more like philosophical. I'd say the practical lesson is that the United States doesn't use nearly enough public transportation and we need more really badly. Traveling by train and public transportation around all the countries we visited is so amazing. Like to be able to get on a train and go somewhere far away in a quick amount of time. Like you can do that in this country. We can get on a plane or a train in Chicago and go to Seattle, but it takes, I'm not even kidding, about 27 hours. Even in Russia, like they were telling us, oh yeah, you can get on a train in St. Petersburg and end up on the other side of Russia, which is, by the way, much larger than in the US, in like 6 hours. They have a high-speed train. And they have a train that's very similar to ours. They just make it a priority. 3 trains a day go there. And it's just, I think that's the more practical thing. Like, we need more public transportation in this country. And then the more philosophical thing is that your expectations of people are most often wrong. Expectations of people that you don't know and places you don't know are usually based in some kind of fear. Not that that's a bad thing, because I think it's normal to be scared of things that you don't know. But I think one thing that I've learned is that it's okay to be nervous. It's not okay to be scared of other people and places. Because I would say, I think even 100% of the time I've been like pleasantly surprised by something. It was never as scary as I thought. The people were always nicer than I thought they were going to be, more helpful than I thought they were going to be. And the places were easier to navigate than I thought they were going to be. Even in like Istanbul, Turkey, which many of us think of as this, not third world country, but oh, they're definitely not as civilized as we are in the US. Their public transportation was amazing, and the people there were so very nice and helpful. And even if they didn't speak a lick of English, they were so helpful to try to communicate something to you so you could get from point A to point B. And so, although we also did see a baseball fight between 2 men in Turkey, so we thought that was going to almost be a raging fight, but the authorities came, so that was nice. We were a little nervous about that. So yeah, those are the 2 things that I think I've learned.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see here. 2 more questions. What are some of the things that prohibit you from traveling, and how do you work around them?
Mm-hmm. I would say time and money, really. As a teacher, I'm pretty lucky because I have time. I mean, we do a lot of trainings in the summer, but I usually carve out time. I also don't have kids, so that makes a big difference. So things that I thought maybe I'd wait until retirement to do, I have the opportunity to do now. But time definitely, and time, like summers are the worst and most expensive times to travel, and that's when I can travel. So that's a challenge. Money is obviously a challenge, although it's not as much of a challenge as I thought it would be. There are some countries in some way, like when we went to Ireland, our flights were $400. It costs more for me to visit my mom in Montana than it did. And then we got Airbnbs, and I think one night, I think we stayed in a really nice, it was a converted horse stable. It was like $40 a night. So that whole trip for 2 people to Ireland, it was like 8 days. I don't know, like $1,500, which some people spend in a weekend at the Dells. So I think it's just a matter of like deciding what you want to do and then and making that happen. And understanding that it's not necessarily out of the range of possibility. It might seem that way because it's far away, but it's not.
That's a great quote.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. And then my very last question to you is, to where would you like to travel next?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I really would like to go to Asia. I'm nervous, not scared. I'm nervous because to me the language barrier is pretty significant. Not only do they have a different language, but it's a different alphabet. And it's not even an alphabet that looks like mine. Like when we went to Greece, Greeks have and Russians have a different alphabet, but they're like familiarities and similarities. Like most Asian languages are picture-based, or what I would see as picture-based. They're not like that Arabic-looking letter. And that's very nerve-wracking to me. Plus, I feel like it's the Western world and the Eastern world are really have a lot of differences. Like for the most part, I've traveled to like European countries, which are very similar to the U.S., and that's where many people in the U.S. came from and come from. And so it doesn't make me as nervous because I feel like it's similar enough that I could probably make my way. I feel like the first time I go to Asia, I should probably take like a tour with somebody who knows what they're doing. Because I like to plan my own vacations, but I'm just not sure how I would do it. I'm not sure what I would do. So I feel like I'd need some more guidance there. But that's my next like dream trip.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I lied. I am going to ask you one
That's
more
okay.
question. What do you think are the biggest benefits of traveling?
I think one of the biggest benefits of traveling is finding out that the world is much smaller than you think. Like it's a small world is a saying because it's a small world. You realize that people really aren't different. I mean, they're just not. The people that you meet down the street from where you live are not hugely different from the people I met in Morocco. They look different. They have different clothing. They certainly have different customs, different foods, but ultimately, like people are the same no matter where you go, and it takes away a lot of that fear of differences. Because once you realize after all the differences at the core, people are pretty much just the same, then you don't really worry about the differences.
Awesome.